Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Thursday, July the 21st, 2022. So, yesterday, Ace Washington Post fact checker Glenn Kessler responded to a tweet from the Republican National Committee Research Department. Did Joe Biden just announce he has cancer? Quote, that's why I and so damn many other people I grew up with have cancer. And just the background to this speech by Biden, just wreckage behind him. It looks like a toxic waste dump or something. So Ace fact checker Kessler says, how dumb is this tweet? Check out Biden's medical report. Before he had president, he had non-melanoma skin cancers removed. Has no one at RNC Research ever had this common procedure? Yeah, well, actually, Town Hall responded, Biden in April, I have asthma, and 80% of the people who, in fact, we grew up with have asthma. Maybe you want to fact check that, Mr. Kessler. Biden today, that's why I and so damn many other people I grew up with have cancer. Libs of TikTok responded, fact checker doesn't know the difference between had and have. And let's go back to 2021. This is from Christopher Tremogli at the Washington Examiner. During a town hall event in July hosted by CNN's Don Lemon, President Joe Biden assured the country that if they were vaccinated, they would not contract COVID-19. He said it to motivate people to get vaccinated, but it wasn't true. You're not going to get COVID if you have these vaccinations, unquote, Biden stated bluntly at the time. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention informs us people can still get COVID-19 even after being vaccinated. Biden centered his pandemic strategy on trusting the science. The major problem with that, as Biden has demonstrated, is sometimes the science, or the consensus scientific opinion at least, is wrong and cannot be trusted. Science is constantly changing. What may seem true on Monday could be proven false on Friday, metaphorically speaking. And then we got this today from White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. This morning, President Biden tested positive for COVID-19. He is fully vaccinated and twice boosted and experiencing very mild symptoms. Yes, these vaccinated people who get the coronavirus nonetheless, they always experience very mild symptoms. Funny about that. More on that shortly. Biden has begun taking Paxlovid. Consistent with CDC guidelines, he will isolate at the White House and will continue to carry out all of his duties fully during that time, given that he wasn't up to carrying out his duties before he got the coronavirus. Well, he's been in contact with members of the White House staff by phone this morning and will participate in his planned meetings at the White House this morning via phone and Zoom from the residence. They're not going to let him have any rest. Consistent with White House protocol for positive coronavirus cases, which goes above and beyond CDC guidance, he will continue to work in isolation until he tests negative. Once he tests negative, he will return to in-person work. Out of an abundance of transparency, the White House will provide a daily update on the president's status as he continues to carry out the full duties of the office while in isolation. Per standard protocol, for any positive case at the White House Medical Unit will inform all close contacts of the president during the day today, including any members of Congress and any members of the press who interacted with the president during yesterday's travel. The president's last previous test for COVID was Tuesday, when he had a negative press result. So Joe Biden has had 4 jabs, and he got the coronavirus anyway. This is from Rob Crilly at the Daily Mail. President Joe Biden insisted he was feeling fine and hard at work on Thursday after the White House announced he had caught COVID-19 and was isolating at his residence. Again, they're not going to let him have any rest. In the meantime, officials shrugged off questions about where he caught the coronavirus, saying it did not matter, but got themselves tied up as they tried to explain when the president displayed symptoms and whether he had complied with CDC guidance on isolating. In a video posted on Twitter, the 79-year-old, the oldest person ever to serve as president, tried to reassure the nation that everything was going to be okay. "Hey, folks, I guess you heard. This morning I tested positive for COVID," he said, standing on the White House balcony overlooking the South Lawn. "But I've been double vaccinated, double boosted, symptoms are mild, and I really appreciate your inquiries and concerns. I'm doing well, getting a lot of work done. I'm continuing to get it done. And in the meantime, thanks for your concern and keep the faith. It's going to be okay," unquote. The message from officials throughout the day was that the president was in good spirits, hard at work, and that there was little cause for concern despite his advanced age. The president's wife, the first lady, that's Dr. Jill Biden to you, said, "I talked to him just a few minutes ago. He's doing fine. He's feeling good." Stringent White House precautions meant he had avoided the virus even as it laid low close aides and advisors until now. Biden's advanced age, his history with non-melanoma skin cancers, and the fact that he takes drugs for high cholesterol and blood clots will all raise concerns that he could be at risk of developing severe illness. And with symptoms emerging on average about 5 days after contact with an infectious person, Biden's recent contacts and travel will be under scrutiny for a possible source. 6 days ago, Biden was in Saudi Arabia, where he bumped fists with the controversial figure of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and earlier he was forced to pause remarks in Israel because of a coughing fit. But Jean-Pierre, during her daily briefing, said it was irrelevant where he caught the disease. "I don't think that matters, right? I think what matters is we prepared for this moment," she said, flagging the availability of vaccines and new drugs since Biden took power. "These are treatments that are going to keep you safe, and I think what matters here is making sure that we continue to do the work. And the good thing is that the president, again, has been vaccinated and double boosted." She continued to say that the priority was contact tracing and Biden's health. While the virus cut a swath through Washington's political class, from Vice President Kamala Harris to cabinet secretaries and successive press secretaries, Biden had avoided testing positive. In part, that was because of stringent measures to protect the commander-in-chief, such as not serving water to guests in his presence, lest they remove their masks, and seating him 10 feet from participants in meetings. Yes, but he's up close and personal with the leader of Saudi Arabia, also Israeli and Palestinian officials. President Biden, according to Dr. Kevin O'Connor, a Biden's physician, is currently experiencing mild symptoms, mostly rhinorrhea or runny nose and fatigue, with an occasional dry cough, which started yesterday evening. Yet the doctor was not present at Jean-Pierre's briefing. Instead, White House COVID-19 response coordinator Dr. Ashish Jha fielded questions about the president's health despite not having treated Biden. That drew accusations that the White House was being less than transparent. "Could we get the president's physician here?" asked White House Correspondents Association President Tamara Keith, "so that we can not play the game of telephone?" And it led to confusion about when exactly the president developed symptoms and whether he had isolated at that point in line with CDC guidance or only after he received a positive test. Now, Joe Biden has been unable to make himself understood for quite some time, years, one might say. But he's not the only one in the White House of which this can be said. This is from the Twitter account of John Cooper, and he's referring to White House Chief Economic Advisor Jared Bernstein. "Incredible. Bernstein says the White House stopped using the word transitory to describe inflation, not because it was false, but because, quote, it has to do with the ambiguity about the length of that word, unquote. We're not quite up to Kamala Harris' Zen standard here, but we're getting close. He continued, I think the lack of specificity about the temporal cadence that was implied by that word led to a level of ambiguity that wasn't serving the debate very well, unquote. Cooper said, like, you've just got to be kidding me. That sentence, specificity, temporal cadence, why, he might as well just have said, piss off, you're bugging me. And there were some of the White House press correspondents getting a little antsy about this kind of thing. At one point, Newsmax reporter James Rosen belted at Bernstein, aren't you having it both ways? When the gas prices go up, it's got nothing to do with the president. When you see some decline, you want him to get the credit? Bernstein replied, the president has reacted from the beginning, talking about how this was such an important priority to alleviate these pressures on behalf of the American people. Then White House press secretary not Jennifer, but Jen Psaki, claimed at an August 2021 briefing that we rely on the Federal Reserve for projections, and they are projecting to come back to normal levels next year. And this is still foreseen as a transitory impact on prices. Biden in December claimed that November's 6.8% annual inflation rate was likely the peak. He said in July 2021 that high inflation was temporary when it was around 5%. Biden called NBC journalist Lester Holt a wise guy in early February before Russia invaded Ukraine, when the TV anchor pointed out that Biden erroneously said high inflation would be temporary and that instead it surged higher. Holt said, I think it was back in July, you said inflation was going to be temporary. I think a lot of Americans are wondering what your definition of temporary is. Biden said, well, you're being a wise guy with me a little bit, as I understand that's your job. Yes, this is the healer, the unifier, of which we heard so much in 2020. The man who would get along with the press, be friendly with the press. Let's go to Alex Berenson's Substack. No, mRNA COVID vaccines do not offer long-term protection from serious illness. Data from the Dutch government show the opposite. After 7 months, they substantially raise the risk of hospitalization and intensive care. mRNA vaccine advocates have one final defense against the failure of their billion-dollar experiment, or as I like to call it, Dr. Fauci's miracle elixir. Okay, the shots won't stop you from getting COVID or spreading it or having symptoms, but they will stop you from getting very sick. And that protection lasts long after they stop working against infection. Only it doesn't. Not against Omicron anyway, and Omicron is the only variant that matters now since it's the only variant that exists now. An official government report from the Netherlands earlier this month has the truth. On July the 5th, the RIVM, a research institute that is part of the Dutch Ministry of Health, reported a basic 2-dose COVID vaccination offered no protection against COVID hospitalization. Worse, vaccinated people were 20% more likely to need intensive care than the unvaccinated. There was hardly any visible protective effect of the COVID-19 basic vaccination series against hospital and intensive care intake, the researchers wrote. Berenson comments, the top-line figures are bad enough. The report is based on hospitalizations across the Netherlands from March 15th through June the 28th, not a small sample. And like the United States, the Dutch relied overwhelmingly on mRNA vaccines from Pfizer and Moderna, the supposed gold standard for COVID shots. But the details in the report are even more disturbing. The researchers stratified the risks of hospitalization and intensive care by time from vaccination and the age of the infected person, and those show that the risks increase over time. After 7 months, vaccinated people in their 50s and 60s had a 68% higher risk of being hospitalized for COVID compared to the unvaccinated, they had a 41% higher risk of needing intensive care. The trends were similar for people 70 and over, though most of them had been boosted or received a fourth shot, so comparisons were harder to make. Negative vaccine effectiveness is a thing, a very bad thing. Again, this negative effectiveness is against severe disease, hospitalizations, and intensive care, not infection, severe disease. The report also showed that boosters and fourth shots did reverse the negative efficacy against hospitalization and intensive care and provide some protection. That fact led the researchers to call for vaccinated people to receive boosters. But the effectiveness of boosters and fourth shots against severe disease also sharply and quickly declined. In people 70 and over, the effectiveness of a booster against hospitalization fell from 85% in the first month to under 50% by 5 months out. The trends for the fourth shot were similar but worse. Though the researchers did not have 5 months of data for the fourth shot, by roughly 3 months, protection had fallen to 60%. The results could not be clearer or grimmer. The mRNA vaccines fail within a few months and then begin to raise the risk of serious outcomes. Why? The promise that the mRNA shots will produce durable T cell protection against severe disease appears faulty. Any protection the shots offer against hospitalization or death probably results from their antibody driven protection against infection, which lasts only a few months. Repeated shots can reverse the trend, but they too fail, and each additional shot appears to do less and fail more quickly. Worst of all, because the shots cause recipients to produce antibodies to the original coronavirus rather than Omicron's mutated spike, vaccinated people now have a higher risk of Omicron infection, which means they have a higher risk of hospitalization or death. Worst of all, the Dutch collected this data during the spring when the existing Omicron subvariant was relatively mild. Now Omicron has mutated again, and we do not at this point know if the new variant is more or less dangerous. But the trends from countries like New Zealand, which are test cases for Omicron's potential virulence because they are highly mRNA vaccinated and have little pre-existing natural immunity, are not promising. Berenson concludes, buckle up. But we keep hearing from the experts and their clacks that no, get boosted and boosted and boosted again, and maybe get boosted every 9 months. And then perhaps if Pfizer brings out a pill version of Dr. Fauci's miracle elixir, we can just, swallow those like Tic Tacs. And, oh, yes, you knew this was coming. Here it is. This is from Nicholas Lanham at Fox News. MSNBC, CNN, ABC, CBS, and NBC are reacting to President Biden's COVID-19 diagnosis with a multitude of different perspectives, with some calling for new masking restrictions and others touting coronavirus booster shots. The White House on Thursday revealed that Biden had tested positive for the virus, but noted he was experiencing very mild symptoms. Jean-Pierre also, yes, we know that already. Dr. Alok Patel, a medical contributor for ABC News, reacted to the news by emphasizing that vaccination is the first line of defense and that Biden is fortunate he has been double boosted. With how much President Biden gets tested and the masks and how cautious they are at the White House, he still tested positive, Patel added. And I will add that Patel drew no inferences from this. CNN White House correspondent Jeremy Diamond also said it was notable it had taken this long for the president to contract the virus. Meanwhile, CBS News' Anne-Marie Green wondered how lax protocols regarding COVID had gotten at the White House, considering Biden's style of being personable, or handsy, as other people might say. White House correspondent Jeff Mason, who has covered Biden since he was vice president under Barack Obama, agreed that Green was correct in her assessment that Biden is a touchy-feely guy. Again, handsy or creepy, as other people might say. Mason pointed out that he was in Cleveland with the president a few weeks back and made note of the fact that Biden had certainly increased his potential exposure, joining in selfie lines and hugging and kissing other people he had met. Any adolescents? Any toddlers? Amid the dismal news, MSNBC and NBC medical analyst Dr. Vin Gupta asserted that the president's risk of progressing towards severe illness was very low, as many consider him to be a super ager. When asked to clarify what a super ager was, Dr. Gupta explained that it was a reference to Biden's ability to engage in exercise such as biking at the age of 79. Oh, do you really want to bring up the biking? Given that President Biden a couple of weeks ago was hurtling along the path at the tremendous speed of, about 10 miles an hour when he fell off his bicycle and then got trapped in it. Yet, despite the optimistic news about the president, several notable figures on television Thursday urged a return to stricter mitigation strategies across the country, such as masking, in light of Biden's diagnosis. Public venues should require masks, Dr. Jonathan Reiner told CNN. Anytime you're meeting with people that you don't know or you don't know have been tested, people should be wearing masks. Dr. Reiner then reiterated or repeated, as more literate people would say, his position, saying that Americans should be pushing for a more aggressive stance against the coronavirus. Take that, coronavirus, and bring back masking across the U.S. just in time for the midterms, I would guess. Dr. Kavita Patel, a primary care physician who joined NBC News Thursday, also echoed Reiner's statement, asserting that while testing helps, masking can be crucial. While she did not float new mask requirements in the U.S., Patel said that the White House itself should return to stricter masking protocols. She added that Biden's decision to get a second booster may have made all the difference in his battle with COVID. Let's go to the chat. Start at the top. Hello to Anran, Dan Allison, Don Willis, Popcasso88, William Hicks, Dan, Anran, Hauper, and Chokokin666, our valiant new moderator. Yes, a wrench. Hello to Tricky Woo. Chokokin666 warns, I will abuse my authority. Thank you for your kind words, Sam B. Hello to Dr. A Dead Name, who says, I and so many like me have cooties. Hello to Ultra Testosterone. And the real test arrives, says Anran. Hello to Emmett Kelly's Earth and Dawn from Beyond. Oscar Toe. Let's see. Who else do we have here? Hello to Dawn from Beyond, who says, there is a COVID-19 tag on this video. Get the latest information from the CDC. Now, why are they doing this? Really? Okay. Is this prior restraint? I thought the Supreme Court of the United States had banned that. Hello to Yo Mama. And let's see. Tricky Woo says, President Kamala, happy, happy, joy, joy. And prognosis negative, says Dan, yesterday's obligatory Seinfeld reference. Dr. Deadname says, he promised to make the prince a pariah. Ultra Testosterone says, KMG, still living in a hotel, bro? Yes. Yes, indeed. William Hicks says, I heard the spot where Biden fell over in his bike is now listed as Brandon Falls on Google Maps. Yes, I saw that. Ultra Testosterone says, when is KMG getting a rental? I don't know. Wish I did. And let's see if there's anyone new here. Hello to Jim Smith and the Right Honorable. Don Willis says, will Tylenol cough and flu be renamed Tylenol COVID control? I'll tell you something. For about 2 years, or almost 2 years, I noticed that commercials for cold and flu medication simply disappeared. They disappeared from TV. Now they are back. Now apparently it's acceptable to have the flu or the common cold. Quachulango says percentage of mask usage in Seattle Metro, 15+%. Hello to My Trail of Disgrace. Halper says, Saki makes me crave Christina Hendricks. Quacholango asks, anyone agree that a high percentage of Jennifers and Jessicas are redheads? Respectable commenting name says, might want to give it a fancy name like vaccine-related immune deficiency syndrome. Chokin666 says, do you think Biden was actually vaccinated? Honest question. Yes, I'm going to say yes, because he seems like the kind of guy who loves the science. Oscar Toe says, same with Heather's being high percentage blonde. Don Willis quotes, the surf punks, why is every other girl in the world named Lisa? It's cyclical. You know, when I was a boy, for several years at school, there were at least 2 or 3 Sallys in every class, and then that name just disappeared. Is every federal medical official an East Asian? Asked Chogokin666. Yes, a lot of Patels. They seem to dominate the doctor biz just as they dominate the motel biz in the United States. Okay. Hello to Jeffrey Pye. Montreal outdoor masking during heat wave is 20 to 30%. And we're still on this topic. Oh, let's talk about the Super Dodgers. That sounds pretty exciting, right? Washington Post, Ellen McCarthy, meet the COVID Super Dodgers. Joe and Susanna Altman are serious poker players. Sometimes when they play in tournaments, they'll place what's called a last longer bet with friends to see which of them can outlast the others. The pandemic kept the Altmans, both 58, away from the in-person tables for over a year. Susanna has lupus, and at the time, they were caring for a friend with cancer, but they came out of lockdown a little over a year ago after getting vaccinated, and since then have had some close calls. The Las Vegas couple dined with friends who subsequently tested positive. Joe spent the day with their 25-year-old son, only to have that son be diagnosed with COVID 48 hours later. Just last month, Susanna went to lunch with 4 friends, 2 of whom tested positive days later. Is there the possibility here that Susanna is what they call a super spreader? Joe and I feel like we're in the last longer with COVID, Susanna said in a recent phone interview. She said that she figures it's only a matter of time before she gets knocked out. That's the way the game goes. At some point, she says, there's only one person left. What, are we all going to die now? Has Susanna considered the possibility, as the Washington Post reported, considered the possibility that Susanna and Joe have had COVID-19? According to the Washington Post, there are no winners in a pandemic. Really? That said, again, is this the bubonic plague? Is this tuberculosis? That said, if you've made it to the summer of 22 without yet testing positive for the coronavirus, you might feel entitled to some bragging rights. Who's still in the game at this point? Not Dr. Fauci, not President Biden, not Denzel Washington, Camila Cabello, or Lionel Messi, whoever Lionel Messi is. I try to keep up with pop culture, but that name is mystery to me. Not your friend who's even more cautious than you, but finally caught it last week. The CDC estimated that nearly 60% of Americans had contracted the virus at some point, and that was at the end of February before the extremely contagious BA4 and BA5 variants became rampant. You might suspect that you are special, immunologically superior, a super dodger. You might also have come up with some bizarre theories about why you've lasted longer. I've always been doing strikeouts, and I don't think anyone else is doing them as much as I can, said Luke Martin, a 30-year-old film producer from his apartment in Brooklyn. And what's a strikeout? Here we go. That's when you take a hit of weed, hold it in while you rip a shot, and then chug a beer before exhaling. And we talked to Luke Martin for this story. For what reason? No, do not do this for any reason. Martin does comedy in his spare time, and was joking mostly. He did start doing strikeouts on Zoom calls with old college buddies at the onset of the pandemic shutdown and continued even when the world reopened. One by one, the people in Martin's orbit fell ill with COVID, but not him. Coincidence? Yes, definitely. That is definitely a coincidence. Health. The lucky few to never get coronavirus could teach us more about it. But among COVID deniers, the always testing negative ones, not the conspiracy theory crew, boo! Theories about the reasons for their good fortune abound. I must have superhuman immunity or something, mused Kathy Moss, a 63-year-old pediatric nurse from Southfield, Michigan. Scientists have found no conclusive evidence of innate genetic immunity. It would be extremely unlikely that any innate immune system properties could protect against all infections, said Eleanor Murray, epidemiologist and professor at the Boston University School of Public Health. But Moss's ability to duck the virus, to her knowledge, we should add, a disclaimer that applies to all these folks, since in theory they could have had asymptomatic cases at some point. Oh, you're going to stick that disclaimer there after 500 words? But of course. Remember when the Washington Post was a serious newspaper? Let's go to William Briggs, statistician to the stars and author of the book, Everything You Believe is Wrong, A People's History of COVID-19. Listen to the science. Here's what the science said. Stay inside for 2 weeks and we'll flatten the curve. Lock down for a month or two and the whole thing will blow over. Install 2-foot by 2-foot science shields between cashiers and customers. Viruses won't be able to figure how to go around them. Go to the store and buy groceries, but don't touch non-essential items. The virus will get you if you have over 12 items. Follow the arrows on the floor because the virus knows which direction you go. Install science stickers on floors spaced precisely 6 feet apart, 1.5 meters outside the USA. The virus tires after this distance. Yes, I'm not going to mention the sex advice that we got from including our own Dr. Bonnie Henry in British Columbia, because it's disgusting, but that's what they said. Forget lockdowns, wear science masks instead, and the virus will suffocate. The masks definitely work and must be worn at all times, even when alone in your own home, which is why the vaccines are necessary and must be mandated. The vaccines are safe and effective, and the side effects many experience are rare. 1 shot is sufficient, which is why you must have 2, and that is why 3 is the number, except when it is 4 annually. If you sit and eat maskless in any public space, you are safe. If you stand, you die and kill others. Vaccines work. But your vaccine's efficacy is canceled when you come near an unvaccinated person, unless you carry a vaccine passport. Then the virus will be unable to infect you. Fire those who refuse a vaccine. Unemployment guarantees immunity. Rumors that some kind of virus was going around in China started to spread as early as December 2019. Across the globe, but people were spooked after they saw a video of a masked man dropping dead on a Wuhan, China sidewalk. What made this video curious was not only that the tightly controlled Chinese media produced and broadcast it, but that men in space suits arrived instantly to scrape the body off the sidewalk. Either China knew its Wuhan Institute of Virology leaked a new and horrible virus, and they had armies of space-suited men trained in body scraping at the ready, or we were being duped. Both could be true, and probably were. It's clear China recognized the propaganda potential of the video and used it brilliantly to juice a panic, a global panic going into its 3rd year, whose ardor is only now showing signs of cooling. Incidentally, where, in the last 2 years of intense scrutiny, are all the bodies dropping dead mid-walk from COVID-19? Seen any others? In their recent book, Viral, The Search for the Origin of COVID-19, Alina Chan and Matt Ridley put forward persuasive evidence that both the Chinese and the Americans had a hand in creating the virus through research euphemistically called gain of function. Since the function gained is ability to kill, a more honest name is gain of lethality research. The purpose of these studies is ostensibly to discover cures for viruses should they, in nature, develop into the same kind of killers created in the lab. Yet since these creations are wholly artificial, it is far from evident that nature would ever provide such abominations. And just where are the promised cures for the man made gain of lethality viruses? None exist. The substances known as mRNA vaccines were developed independently and not as part of gain of lethality research. Who knew what and when? The leaders of national governments must have been given information either from China directly or through other intelligence efforts about the virus and its origins. Their belief that a plague had been released explains their initial fanatical overreaction. It especially accounts for the remarkable efforts of China to constrain what they obviously believed was a shattering catastrophe. It is rarely noted, William Briggs continues, that humanity lived through two body count similar panic free pandemics in the mid 20th century. Or did everyone forget the Asian flu of 1958 to 59 and the Hong Kong flu a decade later? Estimates vary, but the Asian flu killed around 4 million people in an 18-month period, and the Hong Kong flu about the same. And this at a time when the population was about a third of what it is now. Perhaps one reason these pandemics are not well known today is there was no official hysteria around them, no great global spasms of fright, and no hubris that convinced governments they could rein in a respiratory virus and keep it from spreading. Wherever COVID 19 came from, it had to be dealt with. The Trump administration, bearer of supposed inside intelligence, argued for closing borders to bar entry to those who might carry the so called China virus. Naturally, Trump's opponents used this moment as an opportunity to paint him as a racist. Chuck Schumer invited people to prove their non racism by venturing to Chinatown. There he was, the headline says, celebrating Chinese New Year and leaving fear behind. It was about then we began to hear from experts who are credentialed, educated persons appointed to authority by governments. It was they who created what I have termed the science. For instance, after infections were discovered on the Diamond Princess cruise ship, chief medical advisor to the President of the United States, Anthony Fauci, said, if you will quote, if you are a healthy young person, there is no reason if you want to go on a cruise ship not to go on a cruise ship, unquote. The science is a strong function of politics. Fauci later became, by fiat, the science itself. He got his position in this farce because he was there and because Trump trusted him. Fauci was originally famous for panicking the world during the AIDS crisis, convincing us that anybody could get HIV. I will add that Trump became infamous for his promotion of the deadly drug, AIDS drug, AZT, which was a cancer drug, which was never used because it kills everyone who keeps taking it. But back to Briggs. Trump hired Fauci, physician Deborah Birx, and other bureaucrats, all immune to criticism, as part of Operation Warp Speed. This was the public private effort to fund pharmaceuticals to speed up vaccines and the rollout massive testing efforts. When Birx was confronted by evidence her ideas were wrong, she accused her enemies, whom she now called coronavirus deniers, of sneaking in so called parallel data. The CDC would soon follow her lead. Propagandists delighted in these confrontations because they were able to use Trump's hires as ammunition against Trump himself. They considered it their sacred duty to remove Trump, while also shoring up the permanent bureaucracy of which they were and still are a part. Trump at last became responsible for every bad thing in the pandemic, and his successor credited with every good thing. This isn't all wrong. Trump never had the guts to fire his foolish hires, thinking that it would make him look weak. And so America led the world in managerial class-directed panic. The online right, partly an expectation that this could lead to the collapse they had been expecting, and mostly because they are natural pessimists in modern governance, excitedly pointed up the initial rumors. They touted ridiculous videos showing squads of supposed Chinese hospital workers spraying mysterious substances in the streets. They obsessively checked the numbers China released. Their favorite word was exponential. Most followed the usual political divisions and parroted their favorite propaganda sources. Many wanted the government to do something. Nay, they demanded it. Some doctors in the US, sensing this was a chance to get in on a big story, began exaggerating their personal battles with the piles of bodies that were at first entirely fictional. Nassim Nicholas Taleb of Black Swan fame argued a common line of the expert class. We should follow the precautionary principle. This principle states that you should pay any cost to protect against the largest threat you can imagine, and that you should imagine the largest threat you can imagine if you don't have any other information. In the case of COVID-19, the largest threat conceivable was an apocalyptic pandemic. Therefore, no cost was too high to pay. Panic to this class was the only rational response. Those who would not panic, Taleb called in print psychopaths. There was, however, a minority, a sad few, who recalled history and so advised calm. They pointed out that pandemics were common, that there was nothing in any of the early data that warranted extraordinary steps, that the cures were almost surely going to be worse than the disease, which couldn't be stopped anyway because it was spread by breathing. They were not listened to. The model, though, everyone believed that. I'll just jump in here to say that if you listened to my live stream from the beginning, what's that, January 2020, something like that, you will know that I did not panic, that I mocked the panickers and those who peddled the science, and I criticized strongly Trump's adoption of warp speed. Why is this being rushed? And I pointed out, which few people seem to know, that when governments approve drugs, they are not doing any original research at all. Instead, the drug companies furnish research to governments which give it a tick. And given that drug companies typically spend billions of dollars and take years to come up with new medicines, let's say that the drug companies are incentivized to minimize, say, lack of efficacy and safety in their new wonder works. Enter Neil Ferguson, a well-known infectious disease epidemiologist at the Imperial College of London and serial fornicator of reality. He and his Imperial College's team's model predicted millions of dead in the US by midsummer 2020, even if his lockdown recommendations were heeded. Not only was this scary, but Ferguson said that his model was done on a computer, which for some became proof of its veracity. What many do not understand is that every model of every kind in any application on any platform only says what it is told to say. This used to be a bedrock principle of science. It was forgotten, however, when people wanted to pass off models as independent evidence. At the time, a few of us were amazed Ferguson was listened to. He had made a career of being wildly wrong, predicting medical catastrophe after catastrophe, none of which ever happened. My co-authors, Jay Richards and Doug Axe, and I documented his serial failures in The Price of Panic, how the tyranny of experts turned a pandemic into a catastrophe. In 2001, Ferguson asked for mass culling of beasts in the UK because of foot and mouth disease. This cost around £10 billion. His model was called by Michael Thursfield, professor of veterinary epidemiology at Edinburgh University, severely flawed and a serious error. In 2002, he said between 50 and 150,000 people would die from mad cow disease. 177 died. That's in the window, but both the UK and US governments fixated on the upper number. In 2004, he said up to 200 million people would die from bird flu. The World Health Organization agreed with him. Turns out fewer than 300 died from 2003 to 2009. And in 2009, he predicted a global 0.4% mortality rate for swine flu. That would have been about 65,000 dead in the UK. 457 died. And in 2020, anybody with a calculator, if they wanted to, could have noticed Ferguson's model was predicting 56,000 dead per day in the US somewhere around 2020. This was not sane, but its very insanity caused more people to believe it. It was then I discovered you can never be fired for being wrong in the right direction. I will just break in here to say, as mentioned previously, Boris Johnson, I suppose, ultimately lost his job because of the coronavirus, because of the hysterical lockdowns and his habit and his chief advisors, flouting of the rules. Everyone must suffer, but we at the top. And I suggested that before Boris Johnson decided to adopt Professor Ferguson as his guru, he could have asked, one of the many political staffers, do you know about this Neil Ferguson fellow, professor at Imperial College? Has he made any predictions before? If so, how did they turn out? 10 to 15 minutes later, Boris Johnson would have learned not to listen to anything Neil Ferguson says. But back to William Briggs. Ferguson's model promised millions dead even if lockdowns were embraced. But his model promised a great savings in lives. Several governments went for those lockdowns and with a passion to flatten the curve. Great Britain, for example, locked down hard. Residents were allowed outside once a day for exercise or to buy supplies. Neighbors were encouraged to rat out neighbors and did. Citizens were so grateful not to have died, instantly they trundled outside one extra time a day to clap for their nationalized medical system. In the UK, people were arrested for being outside, even by themselves, far away from others in the germicidal fresh air and virus killing sunshine. Only so called essential people were allowed to work. Non essential people, so designated by their all knowing governments, had to suck it up. The pain caused by this would eventually contribute to a spike in global price inflation, the effects of which are still being felt. In America, Ferguson's model was embraced with ferocity. Then New York Governor Andrew Cuomo thought hospitals would be overwhelmed. Thus, it would be prudent to insert the infected into nursing homes, which is where the old and infirm live. He did this at a point where it was already clear that the vast majority of those dying from COVID 19 were old and infirm. He killed many people this way, but won an Emmy. Model based apologies for lockdowns began to appear. Why? Not only were lockdowns stopping deaths, they were making trillions of dollars for us. Yes, the T word was used. Oligarchs got unimaginably wealthy due to the lockdowns. Nations like New Zealand opted for a zero COVID strategy. It was their government's opinion that a respiratory virus could be stopped if only people believed strongly enough that it could be. Magical thinking like this became pervasive during the panic. Bad people thinking bad thoughts were killing people. Good people with good thoughts saved lives. Sweden was one of a few holdouts. They refused to panic. Therefore, every minor uptick in any measure of misfortune was touted as the beginning of their certain doom, and every improvement was roundly ignored, as it is to this day. Florida in the US got the same frenzy freeze out treatment. What makes all this fascinating is that the WHO recommended against lockdowns, masks, and social distancing in 2019 in a major report anticipating the next pandemic. They abruptly switched advice after Chinese money began to flow in the spring of 2020. Curious, no? Briggs continues, it's odd. In medicine before 2020, cases were separate from infections. A case was a patient seeking or requiring treatment, such as by a hospitalization. A case was infected, but not all infected people became cases. It became fake news to remind people of this, or to suggest that anybody who was infected wasn't going to have a near death experience. This was helped along by all the usual sources. We were treated to images of the pitiful withering away in oxygen tents inside sealed rooms, attended by spacesuit wearing dancing nurses. Everybody, they said, could suffer this if they didn't listen to their betters. It wasn't until September 2021 that the CDC quietly released a report stating that 15% of those infected never knew it, and that most infections were mild. From the beginning, it was clear that this was a disease of the elderly and infirm, which is why, naturally, kids had to miss school and be strapped into useless masks. Even today, well into this thing, 2 times as many people under 17 have died of pneumonia than of COVID 19, and about 10 times as many have died in car crashes, but with no mandates to bar kids from riding in cars. Other official numbers couldn't be trusted either, as the temptation to classify any suspicious death, even falling off a roof, as COVID 19 became overwhelming. And of course, we saw the same thing with AIDS. Testing went mad with even the most minor puff of infection called a case. Early in 2020, we had experts warning about flatulence. Others cautioned about speaking English because English speakers use too many consonants, and consonants spread COVID better than vowels. Kids were forced inside tents or had holes cut in their masks so that they could play wind instruments. Early on, the healthy were touting the benefits of certain, let's say, substances, and I probably can't mention any of these things on YouTube. But in any event, this angered experts because they didn't think of it first. Many were banned on social media for spreading so called conspiracy theories about alternatives. By mid 2021, Facebook had suspended over 3,000 accounts, and that was after a year earlier they deleted 7 million posts for COVID so called misinformation. Twitter infamously banned many prominent accounts, including Robert Malone, one of the scientists who helped create the mRNA vaccines. YouTube banned all accounts it deemed were anti vaccine. Initially, vitamin D was discouraged. Later, when it no longer mattered, experts allowed that. For example, vitamin D deficiency was bad. More than once, we heard of experts praising the noble lie. Gross untruths were allowed if they were for people's own good. Experts would decide what that good would be. This hasn't stopped. Even in late February 2022, the CDC was caught hiding information about vaccine efficacy and exposed, if you can believe it, by the New York Times. The CDC was concerned that if people saw the data, they might not come to the official conclusions. The CDC was adept, however, at pursuing the new kind of science we now see everywhere, the science. Anyone who criticizes the science is a denier. The science is generated by starting with a conclusion and then by hunting for evidence to back it. The CDC, trying to generate the science, made the same stupid error at least twice. Once in its efforts to prove that immunity granted by vaccines was superior, a first in the history of medicine, to that acquired naturally through infection, and another time to show that, and I can't repeat this. This is a long essay which I urge you all to read. I'm not going to read all of it because it would probably take me another half an hour. But this is called A People's History of COVID-19 by William Briggs, and you can find it at wmbriggs.com. Let's go back to the chat. Roger Daltrey was against the lockdowns, Don Willis points out. I never knew that. Roger, they did get fooled again, says Anrun. Well, he was a Marine, so that half excuses it by Kevin's standard. Of whom are we speaking? They sent helicopters to harass hikers, points out Chokokin at 666. Don Willis says there is a reason they attach wheels to goal posts. Don from Beyond says, I pray fervently every night that the wicked be brought down as soon as possible. Please, God. Yes. From your lips to God's ear, as they say. Don Willis, hang the DJ. Yes, indeed. That's Morrissey, of course. We're quoting Morrissey's lyrics now, are we? Don from Beyond says, as a happy Florida resident, I'm especially looking forward to voting for my wonderful Governor DeSantis in the Republican presidential primary. Trump done effed up and does not have my support. Okay. Let's see. Damien. We're talking about the name Damien. I think it's just that picture, the omen, that gave the name Damien its, bad aura. I see the new season of Stranger Things bases a character on Damien, who is innocent, of course. I haven't seen Stranger Things. Isn't this is 80s nostalgia? Is that true? I used to watch Hong Kong Phooey, the number one super guy. I have that record, Saturday morning cartoons, mostly done by punk bands, new wave bands, alternative bands. It's really quite good. One of my favorite records. Okay. Let's, finally, my trail of disgraces. A lot of Vickies, Nickies, and Mickeys are sexy. All right. And, okay, do I want to talk any more about this subject? No. In this world of darkness, one seeks light. For as it has been said, it is better to light a single candle than curse the darkness. Which brings us to Michelle Obama. According to the Associated Press, Michelle Obama will have a book out this fall, The Light We Carry, in which she reflects upon her experiences and shares insights on navigating an increasingly stressful world. It's the former First Lady's first entirely new work since the 2018 release of her acclaimed blockbuster Becoming, which has sold more than 17 million copies worldwide, surpassing the sales of any memoir by a previous First Lady or modern president, including her husband, former President Barack Obama. I can explain why Michelle Obama is so popular, especially among women, because she is famous and she is influential and she is admired and she has done absolutely nothing to deserve it. She married the boss. That is her great achievement. So, in the introduction to this book, which is being printed by the Crown imprint of Random House, I've learned that it's okay to recognize that self-worth comes wrapped in vulnerability, and that what we share as humans on this earth is the impulse to strive for better, always and no matter what. But what of humans that are not on this earth, Michelle Obama? More wisdom. We become bolder in brightness. If you know your light, this is Gnosticism. You know yourself. You know your own story in an honest way. In my experience, this type of self-knowledge builds confidence, which in turn breeds calmness and an ability to maintain perspective, which leads finally to being able to connect meaningfully with others. And this to me is the bedrock of all things. No. Bedrock's at the bottom, and you build up from the bedrock. Former First Lady. The new book is not part of the reported 8-figure deal the Obamas reached in 2017, shortly after they left office with parent company Penguin Random House for their respective memoirs. A spokesperson declined to discuss financial terms for The Light We Carry. Crown will publish the 336-page book. Is it 336 pages of Hallmark sentiments? Is it really? In The Light We Carry, Mrs. Obama offers readers a series of fresh stories and insightful reflections on change, challenge, and power, including her belief that when we light up for others, there's that Gnosticism again, we can illuminate the richness and potential of the world around us, discovering deeper truths and new pathways for progress. Yes, worthy of Maya Angelou, who ended her life writing Hallmark greeting cards. Drawing from her experiences as a mother, daughter, spouse, friend, and First Lady, she shares the habits and principles she has developed to successfully adapt to change and overcome various obstacles. What obstacles? The earned wisdom that helps her continue to become. That's in quotation marks. Yes. Never being, always becoming. You see how influential Henri Bergson was? On a Thursday, Penguin Random House announced it was renaming an annual writing prize in her honor, the $10,000 Michelle Obama Award for Memoir. Part of an awards program for public high school students the company launched in 1993. Since completing Becoming, Michelle Obama has written an edition for younger readers and launched a podcast. With Barack Obama and their production company, Higher Ground, she's worked on such projects as the Oscar-winning documentary American Factory and a documentary about her tour for Becoming. Once again, never being, always becoming. When she appeared at arenas nationwide with such guest interviewers as Oprah Winfrey and Sarah Jessica Parker. Promotional plans for The Light We Carry will be announced later. Crown is also the longtime publisher of Barack Obama. Yeah, remember him? Himself a million-selling author. A Promised Land, the first of 2 planned memoirs about his presidency, came out in 2020. A spokesperson declined to comment on when the next book will be released. This is a news story by Hillel Italy at the Associated Press, and it is obviously a lightly edited press release from Penguin Random House. But that's what reporters do now. They lightly edit government press releases, and they call credentialed and regime approved experts. I want to talk about one of America's most famous feminists, Amanda Mandeville Marcotte. I could have said Manjaw, but that would have been too easy, too cheap a joke. And I'm looking at her Wikipedia page, and she is staring directly into the camera, directly at me. And I notice the two large tattoos on both her arms, and she's still rocking that fringe, and a very long fringe, pretty much right to the eyebrows. And her look says, I want to speak to the manager. Yes, that's right now. And you better not decline my request, or you will know the reason why. Amanda Marie Marcotte, born September the 2nd, 1977, is an American blogger and journalist who writes on feminism and politics from a liberal perspective. Marcotte has written for several online publications, including Slate, The Guardian, and Salon, where she is currently senior politics writer. She was born in El Paso, Texas, and she graduated summa cum laude from St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas, which is a Catholic institution. And thus, Mandeville Marcotte is yet another object lesson of the absolute failure of Catholic educational institutions to transmit the faith. Time magazine has called Marcotte an outspoken voice of the left, writing, there is a welcome wonkishness to Marcotte, who, unlike some star bloggers, is not afraid to parse policy with her readers. Time magazine also called her blogging provocative and profanity-laced. In early 2007, Marcotte made several controversial statements on her blog, including criticism of the men falsely accused in the Duke lacrosse case, using vulgar language to refer to Catholic doctrine on the virgin birth of Jesus, and describing the Catholic Church opposition to birth control as motivated by a desire to force women to, quote, bear more tithing Catholics, unquote. Tithing is something that typically Catholics do not do, but never mind that. She is the author of It's a Jungle Out There, the Feminist Survival Guide to Politically Inhospitable Environments, Get Opinionated, and Troll Nation, How the Right Became Trump-Worshipping Monsters Set on Rat-effing Liberals, America, and Truth Itself. And I'm not making that title up. On January 30th, 2007, John Edwards' 2008 presidential campaign hired Marcotte as its blog master, saying that while Edwards was personally offended by some of Marcotte's remarks about the Catholic Church, her job as their blog master was secure. Following criticism, Marcotte announced her resignation from the Edwards campaign. In an article for Salon a few days later, she said her resignation was a result of being targeted by the, quote, right-wing smear machine. Marcotte lives in Philadelphia with her husband, Mark Folletti, a producer who is a vice president of multimedia for Rewire News. Husband, eh? So we learned from Andrea Marcotte. I mentioned Hallmark before. Hallmark makes movies, of course. And according to Andrea Marcotte, they are, quote, basically fascist propaganda, unquote. To the extent that I know Hallmark movies, I'm more familiar with the Lifetime movies because of the risible, women in danger plot. Hallmark movies, based on the commercials I've seen, are about women looking to find true love with handsome men, which of course is the very definition of fascism. She writes Hallmark movies, with their emphasis on returning home and the pleasures of small domestic life, also send a not at all subtle signal of disdain for cosmopolitanism and curiosity about the larger world, which is exactly the sort of attitude that helped breeds the kind of defensive white nationalism that we see growing in strength in the Donald Trump era. Golly. Of course, not her, but a similar mind has told us that Thomas the Tank Engine is patriarchal fascism. But what's going on with Mandible Marcotte? Well, let's have a deco, shall we? This is from her Twitter feed, and there is a picture of her with a cat pulled up next to her face. Tabby cat. I like tabbies. Dear misogynist, yes, I block you for calling me a barren cat lady, but you know that is because you suck, not because I give a shit. On the contrary, I take it as a compliment because it took a lot of work to get to what child Amanda only dreamed was possible. 3 cats, no kids. You know, I imagine that when Mandible Marcotte was a child, that her parents and her teachers advised her to dream big. Well, Mandible did dream big, and now she luxuriates in that dream made flesh. She continues, indeed, one reason groups like the Proud Boys have turned to violence is that they see that men simply no longer have the same power to control women through insults. My foremothers had to placate shitty men. I don't. That more than anything is what tees these dirtbags off. The problem with barren cat lady as an insult is that it implies lack of choice, that you wished for marriage and babies, but you could not attract male interest. But as misogynists secretly understand, the women they are angry with actively rejected that path. If the women you hate are barren because they know not the touch of a man, why ban abortion and birth control? The means of oppression belie the understanding here. What is infuriating is knowing freedom is working out pretty well for women, which is why we wanted it. Jokes aside, there's a larger point here that I wrote about yesterday. Misogynists are angry they can't tell women what we want, so they turn to force and violence. Declining marriage and childbirth rates are indeed a result of feminism, and that's a good thing. It suggests a lot of women in the past were doing those things under duress, and now they don't have to. They are happier. Well, there are many things that people do under duress. For instance, working. You know, in the Garden of Eden, there was no work. And since, Eve sought the forbidden fruit, mankind was condemned to various things, including death and sickness and old age and work. Work is a divine punishment. And most of us work only under duress. But in Amanda Marcotte's A Dream World, duress is something that women don't have to deal with anymore because of the wonders of feminism. But she seems like a very happy person. Does she not? Erin Overbay, another feminist journalist, is not happy at all because some man in a newsroom once said something to her. She is described as archive editor at the New Yorker. She's been the archivist since 1994. Let's talk about racism. Most white people at prestigious magazines don't ever want to talk about race or diversity at all. You really wrote that, Erin Overbay? Why? It's primarily because they've been allowed to exist. Allowed to exist. Wow. Pretty close to eliminationist language there, in a world where their mastheads resemble member registries at Southern country clubs circa 1950. Nope. There's no BIPOCs writing for prestigious magazines. No, not at the New Yorker, not at the Atlantic, not at Slate, nowhere. Okay, here we go. Several years ago, when my New Yorker newsletter hit a 70% unique open rate, as I've mentioned previously here, I noted this accomplishment to a male icon of journalism. I was pleased by this feat and thought he would be too. Instead, he turned to me and said, "Now, don't get cocky." One can only imagine just the crushing pain that this comment occasioned. Now, don't get cocky. those words still echo in my ears. I don't think I've ever, in all my years in journalism, heard a male journalist warned not to be cocky or told to be quiet about his professional achievements. You should have tried listening harder, Aaron Overbay. But it's something many women know and deeply understand. I believe we're witnessing a sea change in the way thousands of women and some men in the media view their industry and in the way they feel able to speak out about industry injustices. And I believe that the sea change is frightening to those in power. Being a female whistleblower, or any whistleblower really, on diversity and gender inequality in the media industry is not easy because you never see women like that woman who got fired from the Washington Post, basically saying, everyone who disagrees with me is the enemy and the Washington Post should deal with them. It's actually quite difficult. I haven't talked about this before, but I will now a bit. Everything in the legacy media world and establishment industry, after all, no matter how progressive the publication, is geared toward keeping the status quo. And there's tremendous pressure put on anyone who questions or seeks to change it. Publications or legacy magazines that happily publish feature pieces on the lack of diversity in other fields may often use tactics ranging from icing you out professionally to workplace penalties to keep people from speaking up about inequality in their workplace. I was a magazine journalist for quite a few years, and it was quite common for some of my colleagues to open up the magazine, the new magazine, and to quote at length from their brilliant latest missive, which was usually met with disdain or open scorn from other people in the newsroom. But some years ago, someone told Aaron Overbay, now don't get cocky. It's almost a Holocaust. Saba Itazaz, who is the co-host and producer of the Toronto Star's daily news podcast, This Matters, responded, if you're a woman who has spent a number of years in mainstream media, you will have a visceral reaction to this threat. The intensity of that reaction will be multiplied based on your skin color, intersectionality, immigration status in the country you're working in. You got any more confessions for us, Saba? Aitataz? Yep, because women, even at the Toronto Star, are famously demure, mousy, you might say. They never complain about men or racism or any of that stuff because, because of the patriarchy. Someone called Sophie, adjunct professor of international politics and theory, researcher on conflicts and, wait for it, misinformation, Columbia postgrad, tweets, very dangerous for Rusty Rockets to platform and legitimize Aaron Mate to his 5 million YouTube subscribers. Mate is a propagandist whose entire career consists of covering up Assad Putin crimes and has even admitted to passing information about Syrian dissidents to Russian officials. Oh, dear. Oh, dear, oh, dear, oh, dear. And Aaron Mate had tweeted, because I have nothing to hide, unlike your Bellingcat pals who've refused to answer for the fraud I exposed. Yeah. You notice that the same people screaming that Assad was the worst person on earth and Assad must be taken down are the same people screaming that Putin is the worst person on earth, that Putin must be taken down. Now, all of these anti-Assad people, well, they don't mention what would happen if Assad were to be pushed out and replaced by a Sunni Muslim government in Syria. That Assad's tribe would be slaughtered wholesale and Christianity would be banned from Syria, but they're all in favor of that. Something to consider. And yes, apparently it's dangerous and frightening, perhaps personally dangerous for Aaron Mate to be heard. Because there are some people, they used to call them in the Soviet Union former people, you know, the left deviationists, the right deviationists, etc., etc. Michael Tracy responded, nothing she posted in her spastic thread demonstrates how anyone could possibly be endangered by Aaron Mate appearing on a YouTube show. She offers no theory of how his appearance could possibly result in the endangerment of a single person, because that's risible bullshit. This is a response to Joshua Collins, and who is a journalism photos on Latin America. Oh, he works for Vice. Of course. This is in reply to a very long thread spelling out exactly how. There's nothing vague about it. But as usual, Michael relies on people not actually reading the claims he proposes to refute, preferring instead to attack a small account with his army of mouth breathers. Oh my, oh my, oh my. Such passion. And I noticed that Governor Whitmer of Michigan, is it Botox? It's been suggested as Botox. She has this strange, frozen, waxy face, which, you know, under lights, it's a very unfortunate effect. I imagine that if she looked at herself in a mirror, she would mewl, I'm melting, I'm melting. This is from Michigan News Source. Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who has vowed to fight like hell for the legal right to abortion, is set to veto more than $21 million in abortion alternatives when she signs the $57 billion 2023 general fund budget on Wednesday. Whitmer has signaled she will veto a variety of programs, including ones that highlight adoption over abortion, tax credits for adoptive parents, and pregnancy resource centers. Yes. Apparently, adoption is a very bad thing, unless it's, you know, gay men purchasing women's wombs. In that case, it's a very good thing. This is from the Star News Network. Non-binary teacher boasts first grader came out as trans after reading book about pronouns to class. And here is a woman with problem glasses. That's all I'll say. An alleged teacher claiming to be non-binary gushed in a video posted to the Twitter account of Libs of TikTok that two of her students, including one first grader, came out as trans to her after she read a book to her class that pushes gender ideology and pronoun usage to very young children. It was such beautiful proof that kids of any age are absolutely capable of accepting anything that they are taught with love. Yes, 6 and 7-year-olds accepting anything they are taught. And I guess this teacher has never considered the possibilities of that. Well, I mean, she's considered the possibilities, but she doesn't understand just how sinister it is. Libs of TikTok responded, homeschool your kids. And I suppose the best response to this was, hang on, wait for it. That's not quite it. How many of them identified as Batman or Superman? And let's go back to Joseph Tainter and his collapse of complex societies. And we are in the home stretch here. Suggestions for further applications. Is a pattern of declining marginal returns the sole reason for collapse? Do complex societies collapse for no other cause? Since it is not certain that all cases of collapse have yet occurred, such questions cannot be decided with finality. Nuclear war, for example, is probably capable of causing collapse and does not fall under the category of marginal returns. At this point, it can be said, on the basis of the discussion in Chapter 3, that no other existing theory can by itself account for the phenomenon, and on the basis of Chapter 5, that major instances of collapse are well clarified by the present theory. The marginal return on investment in complexity is at present the best explanation of collapse. At this point, the discussion will focus on some cases of collapse that are not as well known as those discussed in Chapter 5, but for which there are presently suggestions that declining marginal returns may have been involved. The purpose of this discussion is to suggest directions for future research. These cases not discussed are left out because available data are too scanty for this purpose, not because some other explanation fits them better. China. The increasing costliness of ensuring loyalty of feudal officials seems to have coincided with an upswing in barbarian incursions. There was thus a pattern of increasing costs of integration and of containing stress surges imposed on a situation where returns for such costs may not have increased at all. Chinese dynasties have, as a rule, seemed to undergo deteriorating cost benefit ratios from their founding to their demise. Uh, we hope this is certainly true for the communist Chinese dynasty. Old Babylonian period, despite the loss of dependencies during the reign of Sam Sui Luna, the crown attempted nonetheless to maintain the level of administration established previously. Marginal returns declined axiomatically in an attempt to govern a smaller land area and population with an administration designed for a larger territory. Third dynasty of Sasanian period. As Adams has described, there were periods in Mesopotamian history when maximizing regimes attempted to increase production by expanding into marginal lands and by intensive irrigation. This was done regardless of how returns declined relative to costs, for the purpose was to secure every last possible bit of production. Old Kingdom Egypt. A coincidence of several factors, increasing feudal independence, declining power of the king, increasing establishment of tax-exempt funerary endowments, increased monumental construction in the Sixth Dynasty, and possible Nile unreliability may have combined to yield a central administration that was increasingly costly while it was decreasingly wealthy and powerful. The possibility of output failure in the king's inability to secure favorable Nile floods would have contributed to the perception of a declining marginal return. Harappans. It is not known whether the entire Harappan territory was politically unified. If it was not, then it is possible that competitive relations among Harappan polities was a source of declining marginal returns. Current research suggests that there were indeed several independent Harappan states. Hittites. The expansion policy that led to the establishment of the Hittite Empire achieved success only after generations of struggle. The costliness of this expansion may have left the Hittites vulnerable to the Casca tribes and to other less complex people who seem to have been involved in toppling the empire. Mycenaeans. As suggested previously, it is possible that the Mycenaeans, a cluster of peer polities, engaged in the same kind of competitive spiral that characterized other peer polity systems. Later Greek city-states, ancient and medieval Italian city-states, post-Roman Europe, warring states China, and the Maya. As among the Maya, the upwardly driven costs of such a system, without any real benefits at the local level, would have induced declining marginal returns. Unlike China, where large territories and vast populations repaid conquest and unification, successful competition by any Mycenaean polity would yield little real return. The result was probably constant investment in defense, military administration, and petty warfare, with any single polity rarely experiencing a significant return on that investment. Mauryan Empire. This empire has not been previously discussed except for a brief reference in Chapter 3. It was established in northern India in the 4th century BC in response to the conquests of Alexander. By 272 BC, it included almost the entire Indian subcontinent. Yet it lasted less than a century and by 180 BC was gone. Subsequent empires never achieved the same scale. The breakup began after the death of Ashoka in 232 BC, and one authority cites economic pressures. Vast revenues were needed to maintain the army, pay the salaries of officials, and settle newly claimed land. The Mauryans paid for this in the later empire by debasement of their currency. This strategy sounds reminiscent of the Roman and Ottoman empires, both of which debased coinage to pay for declining marginal returns. Monte Alban. Blanton, as discussed in Chapter 3, argues that the population of the Valley of Oaxaca ceased to support the hierarchy at Monte Alban when it became ineffectual at dealing with disputes and no longer necessary as a defense against Teotihuacan. If so, then the Oaxacan people acted in expectable manner when they perceived an insufficient return on complexity. Hohokam. As described by Adams, Fred Plogg, and Charles Merbs recently excavated 36 Hohokam burials dating from the 14th century, not long before that society's collapse. A significant amount of malnutrition was evident. This is a sparse fact indeed, but it suggests that for the Hohokam, it might be worthwhile to investigate declining returns to the population for investment in complexity. Jill Neitzel has recently proposed that peripheral communities withdrew from the Hohokam system when the cost of participation exceeded the benefits. Hwari. Hwari appears to have invested in a major cultural transformation of the lands under its control. It imposed economic, social, and cultural changes. Major urban centers that included Hwari building complexes were established in each valley. Ceramic styles were transformed. Goods and informations were exchanged across the central Andes at unprecedented levels. It has been suggested that urbanism and militarism, state distribution of foodstuffs, the Andean road system, and the spread of the Huaca language began with the Hwari Empire. Hwari may thus have initiated the investment in these transformations so that the later Inca had merely to reestablish the pattern and thus derive a higher marginal return. For the Hwari, the setup costs of imperial rule may have been excessively high compared to the benefits. Less complex societies. Solons and Leach have argued that in simpler societies, investment in political expansion with insufficient return to the local level engenders disaffection and collapse. Turnbull has explained the Ick collapse as abandonment of a level of complexity that, while minimal, could yield no return on investment. Hunters and gatherers, as is well known, collapse into minimal foraging units, families, when resource or social stress makes large, complex gatherings impossible. And I'll have more on declining marginal returns from Tainter's The Collapse of Complex Societies tomorrow. And let's go back to the chat. And here we go. Scroll down to the bottom. Dear Martha, the men are weak and cold. George Washington. That's from Don Willis. Anran asked a trivia question. What two American historical figures, not celebs, have had the most written about them? One is Lincoln, the other... Oh, not celebs. Okay. Franklin Delano Roosevelt? That's my guess. What else do we have? Wouldn't it be great to build a house on a private ziggurat? Asked Ruslan Akhmatov. Boy, I hope the Harappan script is deciphered someday, says Yo Mama. Ruslan Akhmatov says you can still visit Hittite ruins in Turkey. What is the WM3? The Right Honorable says that's also true in a function of constantly changing communities. Can't get away with that in a stable functioning community. The old ladies know everything. Yes, it's been discussed about the rise of the suburbs. That one reason for the rise of the suburbs post World War II is that many people decided they didn't want other people knowing their business, which of course quickly led to a genre of fiction exemplified by books called like The Velvet Underground, which of course the band named itself after. That what's going on behind these curtains, depravity, no doubt. And I don't think Peyton Place is set, Grace Metalius' Peyton Place is set in a suburb, is set in a small seaside village, something like that. But again, this idea, where people can't see, depravity ensues. Don Willis says KMG has the snitty gay voice down pat. A proper government would shut down the corporate press but allow freedom of opinion exchange online to individuals and civic org, says Ruslan Abzatov. Lamprey Melt, hello. Says Syria 2011-12 is a topic no one touches. Social media scrubbed everything about it other than MSN talking points. Yes, also been scrubbed the fact that NATO powers, including my country of Canada, dropped millions of pounds of high explosives on sand. I wonder if they made a lot of glass. I wonder if they made use of this glass. These constant bombing raids, against the villain of the moment, which had no effect. And then the Russians came in and they were quickly routed. Meanwhile, the NATO countries, including my own country, decided to support the moderates in Syria, which turned out to be a new name for Al Qaeda. Hey, you remember Al Qaeda? You remember they blew up the World Trade Center on 9/11? Those guys? Strange bedfellows. Hello to Art Fong. A local tea shop closed down. I used to love it. Not cheap, but lots of fun sampling oolongs, assams, and all. Well, apparently Sri Lanka, due to its embrace of green struggle, is no longer able to grow tea. I think a large part of the Sri Lankan economy is based on tea. And anyone new? Oh, Tarot Destroyer says driving a big rig truck is like riding a bicycle, except for the gears and the extra trailer wheels and the diesel and humping lot lizards in. Well, okay. Didn't Joe Biden claim to have once driven an 18-wheeler? Really? Of course, he claims a lot of things, you know. Discussion of tea here. As you can see, I drink the black tea, orange pico. Apparently green tea is tight. That's what Jeff Winger said on Community. He was being, sarcastic, but apparently it's just chock full of antioxidants and all good stuff. Terror Destroyer quotes Samuel Adams, the Constitution shall never be construed to prevent the people of the United States who are peaceable citizens from keeping their own arms. In the formal U.S. government indictment of Timothy McVeigh, you can look it up if you don't believe me. When he was arrested, tracts by Thomas Jefferson and Samuel Adams were found in the car. So you know what that means, right? You know what that means. And I'm not going to quote what Thomas Jefferson said, about blood and the Tree of Liberty, because I might get banned. Che Blutarski, hello. So when the frost hit, we literally had to turn on the wipers to get the oil slick off the window. But the key thing is that I had an onion on my belt, which was the fashion at the time. Yes. Oscar Toe says, am I considered a pansy if I like Lady Grey tea? I've never heard of Lady Grey. I've heard of Earl Grey, which to me is like, it's like made out of after dinner mints or something. I remember years ago, I was in an Indian restaurant and they weren't all that popular at the time. But I was a union executive then and, got to seek out the ethnic food. So we went to this Indian restaurant and came time to order tea. And I ordered tea. And then this stuff came, which tasted like it was made out of after dinner mints. So I said to the waiter, do you have any real tea? And with a nasty, mocking look on his face, he said, oh, do you mean orange pico? And I just looked at him shocked, and I thought, yeah, that's what I mean. That comes from your part of the world, Art Fong likes Irish breakfast tea. Too strong for me, I'm afraid. I prefer English breakfast is my favorite blend. Hello to Polygons. Hope all is well. Well, as well as can be expected, I would say. There is one tea I like called Christmas tea, spiced with cinnamon and cloves. And any new names here? You're misgendering the former First Lady, says Emmett Kelly's Earth. Well, I guess I did gender her. Alrighty then, let's get back to it here. Yo mama doesn't like tea. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. Let's talk about Pierre Poilievre. And I'm going to talk about him because Rex Murphy has a column today, which is in my private folder, because the National Post, there's a paywall, well, kind of a paywall. It's easy enough to get around. Rex Murphy has a column today, The Appealing Ordinariness of Pierre Poilievre. Charisma is not the only reason for his popularity. And here he is at a Calgary Stampede barbecue wearing a Stetson hat, which means that he's an ordinary person. Did you ever see the pictures of Stephen Harper at the Calgary Stampede? Clearly uncomfortable, wearing a black Stetson and thinking, I look like a jerk, don't I? Very amusing. So I'll say about Rex Murphy that I quite like Rex Murphy. He's one of the few major media personalities in Canada who actually has something to say, an independent thinker. He had me twice as a guest on his old CBC radio show, which was daring of him because I was working at Alberta Report at the time. But and while Polyev may not be a brilliantly magnetic option, the sight of someone who has at least some reasonable connection to ordinary life, the normal strains of work and living, I'm not buying that, because we know all about Pierre Polyev, and Pierre Polyev is one of these fellows who, like Brian Mulroney, decided at the age of 12 or so that he wanted to be Prime Minister of Canada. He was born in 1979. And of course, he was adopted and raised in Calgary. Then he abandoned Calgary for Ottawa. He's a carpetbagger. At the age of 16, Polyev sold Reform Party memberships for Jason Kenney. Is that the normal sort of thing that 16-year-olds do? As a teenager, Polyev had a job at TELUS doing corporate collections by calling businesses. Okay, he had a part-time job. He also later worked briefly as a journalist for Alberta Report. I'd never heard of him working for Alberta Report, where I spent about a decade. It turns out he did for a while, I'm guessing it's like a month or two, he did the Who's Suing Whom column, or at least the Calgary submissions. These were claims made in lawsuits. So there's qualified privilege for printing them. And nobody liked to do Who's Suing Whom, because it involved going through the courthouse and wading through all of these filed lawsuits and seeing whether anything was interesting, and making notes. A lot of work for very little copy. But I was told that there were a lot of lawyers who subscribed to the magazine simply for that one page or less than a page, because it was interesting legally. At the University of Calgary, Polyev studied international relations following a period of study in commerce. He graduated with a BA degree. As a second-year student in 1999, he submitted an essay to Magna International's As Prime Minister I Would essay contest. His essay, titled Building Canada Through Freedom, focused on the subject of individual freedom and, among other things, argued for a 2-term limit for all members of Parliament. I guess he wouldn't have liked that later on, because he's been elected, I don't know, 4 or 5 times. He won a $10,000 prize. Before moving to Ottawa, Polyev founded a company called 3D Contact with partner Jonathan Denis, who later came to considerable grief in the Alberta government, that focused on providing political communications, polling, and research services. In other words, PR spivery. So, what can we say about Pierre Polyev? That he has no life, he's had no life outside of politics. He was first elected as a 24-year-old. Imagine the chutzpah to think the 24-year-old with little to no experience of the world should be one of those people who tells the rest of us what to do. So he's been an MP for 18 years. And now he wants to be Prime Minister. Again, nothing ordinary about him at all. He's a member of a well-known class, a class of people who have known nothing but politics in their lives. Increasingly, you look up Wikipedia bios of politicians, and it's just politics, 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 maybe some PR spivery, politics, politics. And oh, so frequently, these people are elected in places where they did not grow up, where they were not educated. So let's go to Pierre Polyev's, Ordinary Joe, Pierre Polyev's website. Take back control of your life. Okay. And it's all piffle. It is all piffle. more Canadian paychecks. We need to unleash the fierce power of the Canadian workforce and bring our economy roaring back. Oh, okay. And Pierre Poilievre has no objection, no known objection to over 400,000 permanent residents being admitted to Canada every year, which lower wages, of course, and make it more difficult for Canadians to get jobs. Reclaim Canadian values. Do you know who should be determining Canadian values? Canadians. Okay, so what are these fundamental Canadian values? What are they? He doesn't mention any. Stop just inflation. Okay, as the government floods the economy with printed money, all right. You know what also contributes to inflation? Massive immigration. Fire the gatekeepers. Yes, overburdened with gridlocks, wait times, and red tape. Yes. Back to the Reagan era, back to the Mulroney era. Just cut that red tape. Look for efficiencies. Just search that couch for coins, and we can balance that budget real soon now. This is not a platform. It's just free enterprise. Of course, Poilievre is running based on the hatred. That is to say, that is succeeding based on the hatred, the virulent hatred in many cases, of people in Canada for Justin Trudeau and his Liberal government. That Poilievre has announced that he is not going to take part in the third Conservative leadership debate. The reasons that politicians do this are two. One, they're afraid of being, rocked. That is to say, everyone would be ganging up on him because he's seen to be the front runner. And the other reason is, I'm so far ahead, I don't have to demean myself with this. According to Stephanie Taylor at the Canadian Press, Conservative Party rules spell out candidates must participate in official language debates or face an automatic $50,000 penalty. Participation is mandatory and no substitution will be permitted. Jenny Byrne, a senior member of Poilievre's team. Jenny Byrne, interestingly enough, is Pierre Poilievre's ex-girlfriend. And Jenny Byrne is a woman who her whole life has been devoted to politics. Whole life. You don't want people like that. You just don't want people like that running things. But increasingly, those are the people, they are transnational people because they're largely identical everywhere in the world. They go to the same schools, they learn the same things. They have the same likes, dislikes, prejudices. But let's hear from the former Premier of British Columbia, Christy Clark. This is from a Globe and Mail story by Ian Bailey. Pierre Poilievre is likely to pivot to the political center if he wins the Conservative leadership this fall, says former British Columbia Premier Christy Clark. I think that most politicians, when they finish their leadership race, change a little bit. She says he's a smart guy. I don't think there's any exception to that. If Poilievre wins, he's going to have a choice to make about how he wants to speak to Canadians about the things we share in common. What are the things that we share in common? Because I look at the Globe and Mail and the Toronto Star and National News Watch, and I share nothing in common with those people. Christy Clark is, without question, a woman of principle. What was it, 2-3 elections ago when she was premier. And after the election, there was no one party with a majority. The Liberals eventually the NDP made an alliance with the Green Party. Christy Clark essentially went to the Green Party and said, just tell us what you want and we'll adopt that. Given that the Green Party is dedicated to utterly destroying the economy, and Christy Clark was so desperate to stay in office that she was willing to make that poison official BC government policy. I think that tells you everything you need to know about Christy Clark. Clark is set to talk about the moderate middle of Canadian politics as a keynote speaker at an August 11th gathering of supporters of Centre Ice Conservatives, a group that says it's committed to a centrist approach for the Conservative Party. She will be joined by panelists such as former Conservative Senator Marjorie Le Breton, who has expressed concerns about Poilievre's lead in the polls, as well as support of the self-described Freedom Convoy. A member of Centre Ice's advisory council is Tasha Corridon, who is the co-chair of the leadership campaign of former Quebec Premier Jean Charest. Yes, what the Centre Ice Conservatives, their position is, there's nothing wrong with the Conservative Party that couldn't be fixed by becoming exactly like the Liberal Party. And what counts as the radical center in Canada, and I repeat myself here, is to support, not only support, but to hail the sexual mutilation of children and to pass legislation, as the Conservatives did. Well, they voted for it, or they did not vote for it. There was no vote allowed, no counted vote, to make criminal the counseling, even by parents, to, say, 10-year-olds against their sexual mutilation. That's what counts as the radical center in Canada, suggesting that perhaps it's time to ditch the idea of a radical center. Let's talk about Stephen King. I always love it when people like him get their comeuppance. This is from Ari Hoffman at the Post Millennial. Best-selling author Stephen King was hoodwinked by Russian pranksters into thinking he was in a call with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. During the call, he praised Stepan Bandera, one of the architects of the Holocaust. Popular pranksters Vovan and Lexus spoke with King and appeared to convince King to offer Zelensky a role as Pennywise, the demon clown from King's It, in a movie. The Ukrainian president was an actor prior to getting into politics. The pair also convinced King to consider writing a screenplay supporting the Azov Regiment, a neo-Nazi paramilitary organization. They said, they are people who really love Ukraine. It's not Nazis, it's Azov. The duo continued, of course they love some people like Bandera, our national hero. So what do you think of Bandera? He was in the Second World War and he fought against the Soviet Union. Bandera, a Nazi collaborator, led the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, which was directly involved in the massacre of, well, it's disputed, but up to 100,000 Poles during World War II, killing 133,000 Jews, Poles, and Russians. Over 1 million Jews were killed in Ukraine during the Holocaust. The prankster added, but yeah, he had some crimes, but it's not so big crimes. It's, of course, accidental. They were crimes against Jews, but it's really important to keep them opposed to Putinist propaganda. You see how clever these pranksters are? See, they can't be accused subsequently of attempting to sugarcoat who Bandera was. King, who was wearing a pro-Ukraine t-shirt and hat, replied, well, yes. I mean, you can always find things against people to pull them down. Washington and Jefferson were slave owners. That doesn't mean they didn't do many good things for the United States of America. There are always people who have flaws. We're human, King added. There are things that we do that are bad choices, and then there are things that we do that are great choices. And so, on the whole, Bandera is a great man, and you're a great man, and viva Ukraine. According to historian Karol Burkhoff, Bandera was obsessed with the ideas that the Jews in Ukraine were responsible for communism and Stalinist imperialism and must be destroyed. When the Germans invaded the USSR in June 1941 and captured the East Galician capital of Lemberg, Bandera's lieutenants pledged to work with Hitler and launched a series of pogroms that killed 4,000 Jews in just a few days. A Banderist pamphlet told Ukrainian Jews, we will lay your heads at Hitler's feet. David Lang, one of Israel's largest English language blogs, Israeli Cool, wrote in response to King's comments, I don't believe Stephen King is actually an anti-Semite, but this is still an incredibly offensive take. If he truly opposes anti-Semitism, he needs to apologize for these comments. Apologizing for the mass murder of Poles, apparently, is not something that one needs to apologize for. Jeffrey Kay tweeted, From Bandera's OUN Homeland Executive Proclamation, July the 1st, 1941. People, know your enemies are Moscow, Poland, Magyars, Jews. These are your enemies. Destroy them. This is particularly interesting in view of the fact that the Hungarian army had intervened and stopped several pogroms in Western Ukraine. And of course, the Ukrainians continue to persecute their Hungarian minority, Transcarpathians, in the Ukraine. OUN celebrations, which were accompanied not only by the slogans "Glory to Ukraine," "Glory to Stepan Bandera," and "Glory to Adolf Hitler." Okay. Once again, it's not necessary to apologize for the mass murder of Poles, because they are what? Lesser people? Is that how it works? Let's look at the chat. Cillian Murphy. Is it pronounced Killian or Cillian Murphy? Looks a lot like Oppenheimer. Is there a lot of drama in the life of Robert Oppenheimer? Is this going to be one of those movies like A Beautiful Mind where they just make everything up? Halper asks, can Nolan make a movie with no schizoid time shifts? Robert Oppenheimer worked on the atomic bomb and then felt bad about it afterwards. I'm not seeing a lot of drama there. Chogan 666 says King has aged into an old lesbian. That is a phenomenon that is often observed. What is probably too bloody for Kevin, though? Halper warns. What? What, an Oppenheimer film? Who will play the role of Pound Foolish as a British American? I would be remiss if I did not mention that the novel, Stephen King's It, contains an underage, considerably underage, teenage gangbang. What is it, 4 boys and one 14-year-old girl? And it's a unifying thing, you see? It's a unifying thing. There was nothing about this gangbang in the TV version of It, which appeared, back in the 80s? And of course, nothing in the movies. Those were different times, apparently. Palcasso 88 says Tasha Karedin. Yeah, Tasha Karedin has been an official voice of conservatism going back to what? The mid-90s? She was one of the leaders of the Unite the Right movement, which euthanized the Reform Party. That was its purpose. So we ended up with the Conservative Party of Canada, which represents a Mulrooneyite reverse takeover of the Reform Party. The Reform Party was a genuinely populist party, and we can't have that. Anrad says, good but bloody gangster movie with a frightening performance from Paul Bettany and also Malcolm McDowell. Yeah, I know the one you're talking about. Yeah, there's homosexual rape in that film. No, I don't think that I want to see that. Oh, gangster number 1. Yes. Christy, not Christine, but Christy. Yes, Christy Clark. Yeah, very annoying woman. Although I must, applaud her for her electoral success. When she ran for the leadership of the Liberal Party, she had almost no caucus support. I don't think it would be exaggeration to say that they detested her. And she, terrible polling results, but she managed to prevail with a majority government. It helped that the NDP leader at the time was the worst, the absolute worst. Palcasso 88 says Canada does have a bloated civil service, lots of fat to be cut. Well, if 60, 65, 70% or more of them basically took off work for 2 years and counting, and maybe half of them are still not at work, that suggests to me that half of them could be fired and no one would notice. Now, the fact that these civil servants overwhelmingly vote for the Liberal Party, you see how this is a win-win? Hello to Seraphim Goose. Jokin666 says, remember when Biden went to a steel plant and challenged a hard hat to a fight? Remember when he challenged someone who asked him a question on the hustings to a push-up contest? Or got into it with another person that he met campaigning? Well, my IQ's higher than yours. It has been my experience that people who boast about their IQ typically have little to boast of. Do we have anyone else new here? Lady Grey or Earl Grey. Oh, I see. Lady Grey is like Earl Grey with bergamot, but with added lemon and orange peel. No, I don't want that. I don't need that. I was talking about mineral water yesterday, and one of the reasons I frequently buy a San Pellegrino is because when I go to buy Perrier, oh, it's lemon infused, it's lime infused, it's watermelon infused. No, I don't want that. Mineral water has its own taste. That's all I want. If I wanted, I could buy lemon juice concentrate and add that to my mineral water. But frequently, I go to buy mineral water and no, flavored. No, I don't want the flavored. Ruslan Akbatov says you can get 1 kilogram of delicious Turkish tea black for less than $10 on Amazon. I also make a wine black tea sangria y'all would love. This is another use of mineral water. And, well, the Romans used to do this with whatever water they had, is that they thought that the water was dodgy, so they would cut it 50-50 with wine. I find that particularly in the summer, cutting red wine or white wine 50-50 with mineral water makes for a very refreshing drink that one can drink for 2 or 3 hours without getting drunk. There's a tip for you if you're interested. KMG is the real DB Cooper, says Popcasso88. Okay. Sri Lanka was Ceylon. Indeed it was. You can see it. I think you can see it in the movie Bridge on the River Kwai. That's where their operation is planned, at any rate, and that's where William Holden is found out as a faker. I'm assuming that everybody has seen Bridge on the River Kwai. There's a couple of things that rub me the wrong way. James Donald and his moralizing my character. But they have Burmese bearers, women, the raiding party. And, the final scene where there's all this death and destruction. And the Burmese women are unhappy about the cruelty doled out to the Japanese soldiers. And I thought, no. In real life, the Burmese women would have complained that the soldiers weren't cruel enough to the Japanese. This isn't anything especially Burmese, just that the Japanese were so notorious for their own cruelty to conquered peoples. And much of this cruelty was, well, how should I put it, for fun. Alec Guinness actually got third billing in Kwai. Yeah, Tunes of Glory. Anyone seen Tunes of Glory? Alec Guinness he could play practically anything. And I don't think I've reviewed Tunes of Glory. It comes from 1960. It was directed by Ronald Neame. And Ronald Neame did The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, which is really not much at all like the novel, but it's a good movie. It is a good movie. And let's see. Oh, we did the Poseidon Adventure. Wow. And Scrooge with Albert Finney. So Tunes of Glory is set in Scotland. And originally, John Mills was going to play the over the top soldier that Alec Guinness plays. And Alec Guinness was going to play the reserved officer who's brought in to run the regiment, much to the distress of the soldiers. And John Mills he's been through the mill, and you can see that he is very frail and on the verge of collapse right from the very beginning. And they decided it would be more fun to switch the roles. And thus, both Alec Guinness and John Mills give absolutely outstanding performances. Dennis Price is in it. Always good. You've heard me praise him before. Gordon Jackson, venerable Scottish actor, who's, of course, also in the prime of Miss Jean Brodie as one of Jean Brodie's lovers, who wants to marry her, but she is not about to be tied down. And so he marries another teacher at the school, and Miss Brodie is put out. And the lovely, beguiling Susanna York. You should check out Tunes of Glory. It was from a novel written by James Kennaway, who died, sadly, at the age of 40 he died of a heart attack. Okay, I thought he died in a car accident, but he died of a heart attack while on the road at the age of 40. Sad, sad loss. And that's called a wine spritzer, says Chokin 666. I did speak on it? Okay. One forgets Guinness was a very great actor. If you've seen him play George Smiley, well, this is another one of his great performances. That was 2 TV serials. And speaking English when he shouldn't in The Great Escape. Yeah. British American says, I'm sure we'll soon be gaslighted into believing that there were all these brilliant black physicists working on the Manhattan Project. Perhaps. I don't think Christopher Nolan is going to do that. People complaining about lack of diversity in Oppenheimer movie. Do you think that many BIPOCs are going to see a Christopher Nolan movie about the Manhattan Project? This is a movie that is not going to have a non-white audience. It's not going to have it. It's not. I mean, everyone knows that, right? What about Alec Guinness's Hitler, says Emmett Kelly's Earth. I don't know that I have seen that. I know that Alec Guinness thought very highly of it. So that's it for today. And I'm going to be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it, as always. And I'll be back on the air tomorrow, same time, same channel. As I said earlier, if you'd like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, you can donate directly to the live stream via Interact at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection to ease the burden. Good night.